This is JC Setting the Record Straight podcast. I'm your host, JC. On this channel, we set the record straight. That means we fact check and correct commonly believed misinformation and propaganda. This video was originally done in response to some ignorant and homophobic statements made by Judge Joe Brown regarding civil rights pioneer Bayard Rustin. Now, I have edited this video to take out the portions that reference Judge Joe Brown. At any rate, Bayard Rustin was the real architect of the Black Civil Rights Movement. All credit has been given to Martin Luther King only because Bayard Rustin was gay and Martin Luther King was presumably straight. For this reason, I do not celebrate Martin Luther King Day. Now I'm going to play an edited version of my previous video that I did on Bayard Rustin. I'm going to pin the original video for those of you who would like to see the original video in its entirety.
Bayard Rustin was one of 12 individuals, both Negroes and whites, who left New York City in April 1947 on a so-called journey of reconciliation through the southern states. The purpose of this bus trip, organized by the Fellowship of Reconciliation, was to test racial discrimination laws. On April 17, 1947, Rustin, Negro, was convicted at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, for sitting with a white man on a public bus.
Those who had been arrested were sentenced to 30 days on the road gang, where they were doing road work, tied together with chains.
We worked for 10 hours a day. It was a very harrowing and ugly experience. The most degrading condition of the job was the feeling that I am not a person, I am a thing to be used. When I returned to New York, I wrote about my experiences for the New York Post in a series of articles called 22 Days on the Chain Gang. As a result of those articles, the chain gang was discontinued in North Carolina.
So the U.S. Supreme Court had already struck down segregated busing. However, in the South, they still were not upholding the U.S. Supreme Court's decision. So Bayard Rustin used himself as a case study to show that they were violating the law. Now, Bayard Rustin was doing this way before Rosa Parks. So he was arrested and put on the chain gang. As most of you know, prison and jail is just backdoor slavery. So this man put himself on the line to end segregated busing, but he ended up killing two birds with one stone because he ended up putting an end to chain gangs in his home state. Now, that clip that y'all just watched was taken from a speech that Bayard Rustin gave at the March on Washington. In case y'all don't know, Bayard Rustin is the one who organized the March on Washington. At that point, there had never been any type of protest of that magnitude. When they were discussing putting the March on Washington together, they really didn't have anyone who was capable of doing it except Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin was the one who had all the context. Bayard Rustin knew how to raise money. Bayard Rustin knew how to coordinate things. Now, I read this book about him way back, probably 15 years ago, so I don't remember all the details, but there was a lot of stuff that was involved in that. I mean, I believe there was like 250,000 people that were there. He had to coordinate bus rides and make sure people had access to water, there was a lot of stuff that was going on with that too. Arranged speakers. And again, no one had ever put together a protest of that magnitude. And he did this without any computers or any of that stuff. So Bayard Rustin really set the blueprint for political protest, which is still used today. Now, a lot of people talk about how Bayard Rustin was an advisor to Martin Luther King. That really minimizes his role. Bayard Rustin was a civil rights leader in his own right. He was a mover and a shaker way before he met Martin Luther King. Now, I know a lot of people don't like the nonviolent tactic, but that didn't come from Martin Luther King. That came from Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin went to India to study nonviolent tactics from those who worked with Gandhi. Gandhi had already been assassinated, so he didn't study directly under Gandhi, but he went to India to learn how to do it properly. Martin Luther King had no concept of nonviolence. In fact, Martin Luther King had armed guards outside of his house, and a lot of those Christians that were dealing with Martin Luther King, they were against nonviolent tactics. So people are acting like he just advised Martin Luther King. No, his role was much larger than that. He was the actual organizer and the strategist. He was the one who put those events together and sent Martin Luther King out to go give speeches. So in essence, Martin Luther King effectively worked for him. And by the way, Martin Luther King didn't actually write that I Have a Dream speech. I'm not going to get into who actually wrote it, but if all you're doing is reciting speeches that somebody else wrote, I don't see how you're being celebrated as the symbol of civil rights when the gay man who actually did everything is being unrecognized. And just to make it clear, the March on Washington is what led to the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So without the March on Washington, none of that would have happened. And that was all made possible because of Bayard Rustin. So really, the black community owes those two pieces of legislation to a gay man. Now, Bayard Rustin has done a lot more than this. I don't have his book right in front of me, but his accomplishments are incredible. There is a documentary called Brother Outsider, which I have, but it's not available online, and because of copyright, I really can't post it. But this man was literally the pioneer and founding father of the civil rights movement. So anyway, y'all look up Bayard Rustin and look up all of his accomplishments. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks for your support. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you will know when I upload new content.